Welcome, everybody. This is the very first episode of the Lost Travelers Club's Peregrine DadCast. What is a peregrine? Well, I had a dream. First of all, my name is Henry Cameron Allen. I'm the founder of the Lost Travelers Club. And this is Jeff Kamen and Bill Fennell, who are in our Fellowship of Fathers circle. If you want to join our circle, it's weekly. Every Sunday, we meet at noon Eastern Standard Time. And it's a wonderful group of guys. And we are conceiving and developing projects, purposeful projects, that allow us to channel our grief into service, into good things, grief into goodness. And so, yeah, so I had a dream where a peregrine falcon flew down and stood in front of me and looked up and said, "It's time." That's all it said. And it woke me up at 3 a.m. And I knew exactly what it meant. It meant that for generations, possibly eons, possibly forever, there's never been a word like widow or orphan that a parent who has outlived their kids could turn to as a way to identify themselves. When people ask us, "Do you have any kids?" For those of us like myself who had a single child, I have no choice but to open my chest up and pour out all my most personal, sacred pain for other people to experience in the way that they will. And it's a very vulnerable feeling. It has been for me. It's been 15 years since my son Cameron passed from brain cancer at age 13. And I was a single father. He was my only child. So it was really an existential crisis. And I've been on a quest for the past 15 years to find that word, to find the right word. The closest thing that I found up until now, well, there have been two. One of them is hyphenating my son's name with mine. For many of us, when we lose a child or outlive our child, I'm trying to avoid the word loss because they're not a set of keys. I know exactly where he is. To hyphenate his name with mine not only links us and keeps his name in the world. My experience after he passed was that nobody would speak his name, not friends, not family, not strangers. And I missed that. And so to hyphenate his name keeps his name in the world, associates him with me. It's a link, it's a bond, the way that people who marry sometimes will hyphenate their family names. But it's also a mathematical equation. It's Henry minus Cameron in the physical sense. And it tells a bit of the story, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't universal enough. And so there was that. And then I was on a journey in Europe and I was put on a wrong train and I returned to the point of departure and the ticketing agent looked at me and said, "Ah, you're a lost traveler." And I almost cried because that expressed to me what it feels like after outliving your child. For me, it was a lack of direction, lack of purpose, not knowing where I was going. How did I carry this through my life, through the rest of my life? And so the Lost Travelers Club was born. It's something we were just talking about earlier, Jeff and Bill and I, about how people will call outliving one's children the club that nobody wants to belong to. Well, we're here and we might as well belong to one another and belong to a club and reflect one another's experience and find ways together to not get to the other side of grief, because there is no other side, I don't think, but to move through it, to break through the threshold between the state of mourning and the state of grieving, which I believe are two different things. They're all part of the grief journey, but there's a membrane, sometimes a very thin membrane between the mourning period and the grieving time. And only you know when you've crossed through it. Mourning is a passive state. It's a temporary state. There's nothing to do with mourning, but be in it and experience it. There's a numbness. You can barely even experience it. But when you break through that membrane into grieving, grieving is permanent and grieving is active. And so that's what the feeling of the Lost Travelers Club is about. It's about empowering peregrines to break through that membrane, to break out of the stagnation of mourning and grief and be active in it together in community with others. So I welcome you to the Lost Travelers Club. If you have outlived a child, please contact us. And we have a lot of wonderful projects emerging right now. And this is our first one, the Peregrine DadCast. And we chose this DadCast very specifically because fathers are underserved in the grief world and barely talked about, barely addressed. And so this is a way to join together with other men who have experienced this, and at every level, So Bill, Jeff, please jump in here. I would love for you to share your stories and your experience with the Lost Travelers Club so far. Jeff is on our circle, our Council of Peregrines, which is a circle of veteran peregrines, people who lost their children some time ago, passed, and serve as an advisory board for the organization. So why don't I introduce you first, Jeff?
Okay, my name is Jeff Kamen. I'm a broadcast journalist, at least I was for a half century. Now I'm retired. I live in a place called Central Virginia, a place I could have sworn I never would have wound up, but this is where I am. And despite what people might have read or heard about the people in the forest of Central Virginia, they tend to be kind, caring, and they treat each other with warmth and affection across racial lines. So that's a lovely surprise. What wasn't a lovely surprise was the slow motion passing of my kid. Nathan James Kamen left his body at age 41. He would be 56 if he were with us now. And he did it by chasing his shot glass off the safety ledge of a 19th story balcony of a high rise in Chicago. I was a police reporter for many years, and I did something incredibly stupid. I raced to the scene as though I was covering the dramatic death of some stranger. Bad idea. A couple of days later, there was a memorial service for him, and I did something else, which was strange. I wore his clothes so he could attend. And I'm telling this story not for the shock value, but because I want everybody who sees this podcast to understand that every single death of a child is not only a shock, but it's unique. And unless your kid was among those killed in a bombing, each of these losses, each of these deaths happens by itself in a moment in time, in a place that is unique to the tragic loss to this day. And once we accept that we're in a unique experience, but that has handholds which give us permission to reach out and find strength in others, in other dads, despite the fact that men in Western culture are really bad at maintaining friendships, really bad at reaching out when they're hurting. And the pain of grief is gradually transformed from screaming siren emergency into a dull timpani roll that you eventually will find a way to tune out so that you can survive each day and along the way find a way to honor the continuing connection that you can have with the spirit of the child who no longer is in the body. I think I've spoken too long.
No, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Bill, how about you? What's your experience been?
Okay, so my name is Bill Fennell. My daughter, Caitlin, was 24 when her second time battling leukemia got to her. Um, it wasn't actually the leukemia, it was the treatment because she was compromised. She got a simple yeast infection, and over the course of a week, she turned and couldn't fight it off, and it led to sepsis, um, and she passed away. Um, so that is how I joined the club. Um, First year, like everybody's probably, was quite the mess, and then it slowly evolved into things. I had the pleasure, I guess we'll say, pleasure is probably not the right. I had one saving piece out of the madness. We registered people for uh, bethematch.org, which is an organization that sets people up to be potential bone marrow donors. So we registered all kinds of people, probably thousands of them. And three kids in our circle got phone calls that said you're likely to be a good match, come in for the additional blood work. Two of them got to be matches and changed the course of family. So that's my bit of sanity that helped pull me through the madness. Um, and then I just kept going for a while. And part of my overall plan actually started prior to my daughter, was I wanted to travel, and then all the pieces finally fell into place, um, 4 years later. So my new wife and I bought a shuttle bus. We converted to a camper. So we took 10 months and we were traveling all over the south and southwest of the US. And that led me to the desert of Arizona, where I read this book called The Grief Recovery Method. And it was just a very uh, good outline of how to move from that grief, that intense grief, into grief recovery. Kind of like being an alcoholic. You're always the alcoholic, but now you're in recovery. So we're always going to be a griever. We're always now in recovery. So that led me in the back of it to a website. Would you like to be a certified grief specialist? So I became a grief specialist. And that led me down some other paths. Currently, I work at a nonprofit that does a couple things, mainly with the homeless. So I work in a day shelter now for the homeless, and I participate in groups, um, and help people work through their grief. And then I found this group. Well, I'm guessing it's probably close to 2 months now.
Yeah.
And joined this, and am glad to be here to help others who are struggling along the path.
Thank you. It's really good to have both of you. I should mention that there are several in our Fellowship of Fathers Circle who will also be co-hosting, and they couldn't be here today. So it's not just going to be these three faces that you see every week. We're going to be a different constellation, a different cast of peregrines. That's what a group of peregrines is called, a cast, which for me as a theater guy, it works. So expect a different cast every week. We are going to make this a weekly podcast, and it'll launch every Tuesday. So I think that consistency is going to be very important. One thing that you touched on, Bill, that I think is a really important part of this conversation, and certainly the impulse behind the Lost Travelers Club, is the way that so many of us, fathers and mothers, find something in ourselves that wants to help remove the stones out of the paths of the people coming up behind us, or people who are feeling really lost on this journey, to help them break through, to help them move forward in their grieving journey. Like you said, there's no recovery from this. There's no healing from this. This is not a healing circle. This is something else. We have to acknowledge what happened. We have to accept what happened. That's the very first step. And that takes time. No matter how our children left, it takes time to accept the fact that they've moved to a different place. And so many of us are feeling this impulse to be helpers in the world, not only for the grief conversation, but in general. And so this is a way to do that. And we started the Fellowship of Fathers to get that conversation going. What can we do together to be helpers? We're doing things, all of us, Jeff, Bill, myself, others, are doing things individually to affect other people and channel our own grief into service to other people. And I had the thought, gosh, imagine what we could do together. We're limited in what we can do individually, but together we're unlimited. And we are now in the process of developing Lost Travelers Club Africa and Lost Travelers Club Portugal. And so if you are somewhere in the world that you believe this would be a helpful movement to bring to the table, that you may consider directing or being a part of in your country, please reach out. We are an international organization now, and that will keep expanding. Let's talk about helpfulness. Let's talk about what we've needed in terms of guidance and in terms of help from other people on our journey. You know, for me, it's been 15 years so far. And I was very lucky that we were treated where we lived, and my community rose up around me. They held me through those last 2 years, in and out of hospitals for months at a time. And they brought me food, clean clothes, nail clippers, things you can't even imagine thinking of when you're in that state. And already, even before he left, Cameron and I had this impulse to help other people. The Lost Travelers Club used to be called the Brain Candy Project. And it was, our tagline was holding parents so parents can hold their children. And that impulse is still there. That impulse is still there. This is why I want to get away from the words like loss and bereavement and death, because I feel like our children are still here. They only live inside us now instead of outside our bodies, and they live through us as well. A lot of people, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of people have said to me, Henry, I never knew Cameron. I never got to know the boy, but I've met him through you. And that is such a point of honor for me, that people recognize him working through me. We're still a good team. We're still connected. So I didn't lose him like I lost a set of keys or my favorite scarf. I know precisely where he is, and he's right here. There's my Cameron Cardinal on my heart. A lot of guys get tattoos as well, which is really interesting. And I want to hear in the comments section, did you get a tattoo? Did either of you get there it is. What does it say?
Live life for her.
Beautiful.
It's her writing. Her ashes are mixed in.
Wow.
At the end, let's see if we can get it, is the semicolon.
Yep.
So semicolon, as you go through reading and you're taught in your English class, is to pause. So what it represents is this young girl many years ago had attempted suicide.
Right.
And to remember it going forward, she got a tattoo of the semicolon. I want to pause and think about what I'm doing. Otherwise, it's a period. That's the end. There's no more. So when you see that, it's somebody who's honoring somebody who has attempted it or completed it, or somebody who struggled with it. And the other part of my tattoo is I was in the group called the Compassionate Friends, and one of the other parents was a tattoo artist. So I immediately knew she had to do this tattoo for me. So most tattoo artists are probably going to be a little squirrely about allowing you to do the ashes in it because they are required health regulations not to do things like that. But she was more than gracious and allowed me to do that. So yeah, the tattoo things, quite a few people tattoo, but the rise of tattoos are just skyrocketing everywhere anymore. Um, so it's not the men, the women, everybody, but yeah, the meaning behind it, the memorial tattoos. Oh man, I've seen some amazing artists who can just nail that ink to look like that person. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean, it really it's an amazing art form. It's really grown into something. I see people who have images of their child
Yeah.
put on their body, or like you, it's a phrase or their handwriting. I've even seen the EKG, uh,
Mhm.
the heartbeat represented on their body or even their voice pattern. And if you scan the tattoo, you can hear your child's voice. I mean, it's amazing, amazing what people can do now. Um, I felt that it was important. My first one was the cardinal on my heart because 3 days before he passed, Cameron whispered to me to look for cardinals as a sign that he was around. And cardinals only exist in North America. They don't exist anywhere else in the world. And so I knew I would be traveling. And
Really?
yeah. And so I thought, well, now it's the first and last thing I see every day in the mirror. And it's a reminder that he's with me always, on my heart, in my heart. And then it's sort of grown into this whole vision quest story on my body, and I'll tell you about it sometime. You can't, they're like
The
potato chips.
addiction.
You can't get just one. Um, but it's we find our way, and the irony of the organization's name, the Lost Travelers Club. A lot of people at first they'll think, oh, it's due to losing our kids. Well, no, it's not, because I don't believe we lose our kids. It's about the feeling that we have as parents wandering life after surviving our children. I love the word surviving because that's what we're doing. Every day is a recommitment to survival, isn't it? And when you read an obituary, the person that the obituary is written for, it always says so and so is survived by their father, their mother, their brother, their sister, etc. Right? And so our tagline, surviving parents getting there together. Where's there? We don't know. There is no there, really, but it's in the getting. It's the active verb of getting there. Wherever that is, it's going to be, as you said, as Jeff said, um, it's really about getting through, not to the end of anything, not recovering, but in recovery. I love that you said that.
And I think going back to what you said about the people wanting to help, and there's this, and knowing where your child is. There's like I hate stages. I hate the word, but
Yeah,
there's patterns because there's no real stages,
right.
and that's another whole thing. But anyway, so
Come
there's
back
some
next
that,
week. We'll talk about stages. Yeah.
yeah. So there's that bereavement and that fine line you talked about,
Right.
and some stay there. They never make it out. They're just stuck in the mire of it and can't make it out. And they're in some of those, when they make it out, start that journey of, I feel the need to help the others who have entered the journey. Um, and there's definitely that distinction. And don't know what it is that flips the switch for some, that keeps some people stuck, and others are entering. And and then some of it is science fiction you have you go through the wormhole, you're in this universe, and you're trying to work, you find the door back. We're in a new universe that has no door back, and some people just can't make that adjustment. We have to be in the moment of, this is the new universe. Our child physically isn't in it. Now
Right.
we may still have, a lot of us still have the connection. And then I guess I want to go back to, what is it that doesn't allow some of them to stay connected? Or is it just of, once they get through that bereavement, it allows it to progress? I don't know. Because I mean, there's some people that are, it takes them a long while to, oh, I finally found my child in the ether, you know? Because there's a lot of people, I want that sign, I want that sign, I don't get that sign. And uh, I don't know if they're focused too hard. There's too many things, whatever that is. I don't know how to help somebody sort that piece out,
Right. Right. No,
there's that.
it's a real question, and in the work that I do, I have recently identified that the overarching purpose that I have found in my life is in universal life skills education, and grieving is a universal life skill. All 8 billion people on the planet are going to grieve,
Yep,
and this is a skill that no one is taught. No one is taught in
absolutely.
childhood. No one is taught in school. No one is taught in university, right? There are university majors around grief, but there's no real universal education around it.
No,
And
we get taught to put a tie on,
yeah,
to put a band-aid and a tourniquet,
yeah.
do our taxes and other things. But the thing that every single person will go through, we have no education in it. We do.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase that. The education we get is passed down bad things that we've learned from others who couldn't cope with the grief, well, that they couldn't help. They didn't know what to say to somebody in the grief.
And
And
it's hard to know what to say if you haven't experienced it yourself.
yeah,
I liken our experience to losing an eye. You can pop a fake eye in, and you can look at somebody and not realize that they're looking at the world from a completely different perspective than everyone else in the room, right? You can put on a fake eye, and nobody will tell you. You can't look at somebody and know their experience. And that's why I think this podcast is going to be very important, so that we can talk about it. I don't qualify grief, or the way that people experience grief, and maybe Jeff, you can expand on this, as I don't qualify it as good or bad. Everyone has their way, and because we are in a time where we don't live with our grandparents at large in the West anymore, we put them in a residential situation where we don't have to watch them die. We don't have to really experience that. When they pass away, that's sort of the end of it. We put them in a box and we bury them in the ground, and then it's done. There are other cultures in the world who perhaps do it better than that you carry your ancestors within you. And something that was an epiphany for me was the realization that my son and your daughter, Bill, and your son, Jeff, they preceded us in passing, and that makes them our ancestors, our antecedents. That was a big epiphany for me. And I have always, because I grew up all over the world, I was very fortunate in that sense to see it play out on the human stage, the spectrum of the way people deal with one another, the way that we deal with grief and grieving, that I had maybe a little bit more of an expansive idea of how to meet it when I did. I don't believe in death anymore. I don't think it's a thing. I think we've been lied to about it as a way to control humanity. And, what we know from physics is that everything is frequency, everything. And frequency can't be created, it can't be destroyed, it just transmutes, it changes form like a great cosmic radio. We just need to learn the skill of turning the dial, sometimes very, very subtly, in order to match whatever frequency our children are operating at now. And when we do it, we feel it, we sense it. We have a lot more than our five senses, which is another lie we've been told, right? That you only have five senses. No, you have many, many other senses.
Consciousness is powerful stuff.
It
And
is.
when we come to understand that it exists and we learn how to surf it, how to be present in it, how to not be frightened by it, but to accept it and embrace it, all these various forms of suffering, the worst of which, of course, is the loss of a child. Every shrink will tell you that, no matter what background they come from, or no matter where they are in the world. But this loss of a child, and I got to tell you, I'm concerned that we're going to get hung up on language. What we have to, I think, is experience. We have to allow people to use language that is more natural to them. I mean, ideally, we could have a whole lexicon of helpful language.
Yeah.
Some language inherently harmful. But if it's the lingua franca, if it's the way people have always spoken, I think we have to be careful not to make them feel like they have to choke themselves instead of say natural.
Thank you for saying that, because I don't ever want it to be interpreted that we're saying we should never use these words. They are, for me personally, they are triggers. And I think that it's worth having the conversation around and listening, actively listening to one another and the language that we do use. I don't say that people should all refer to themselves as peregrines, for instance. Works for me. And if you go to the website, losttravelers.club/peregrine, you will see why I feel it works as a universal word, right? But I'm not ever going to say everybody should identify this way. There are other words like viloma that a lot of people are using. Do you know the word viloma? It's a Sanskrit word, ancient word that means, it translates to something akin to against nature.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's the ultimate upside down. We are meant to experience and cope with, and we are wired to deal with the passings of our elders and our peers, not our children. That picks us up and spins us inside out and upside down, which is why it feels so bloody awful for so long, because it violates the natural order of the universe. So
my question is, not to interrupt you, but my question is, does it? Does it? Or is that what we've been taught, and therefore that's what we hold to in terms of, because children have been preceding their parents in dying since the beginning of people. This is nothing new.
Yes, but in the Western medicine paradigm in which most of us live, even high-end other paradigms of effective medicine, children don't die before their parents. It just doesn't happen statistically. So yes, it is.
So 1%, it's such a tiny percent.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so strange, so odd, so abnormal, whatever you want to call
shattering.
it.
I like the word shattering. Yeah.
Shattering.
It is very much shattering. Absolutely. And it's, I'm not here to say that it's not. I think that, anyone who's been through it or is going through it is going to be the first to validate that. I feel that for me, in terms of the journey and the acceptance of it was the biggest hurdle. Even though I had 2 years to process it with him, he knew every step of the way what was going on. And I've met people who had a healthy child like yourself one day and then gone the next. I can't imagine the shattering of that. I can't imagine, and they look at me and say, I can't imagine watching your child expire for 2 years, being helpless to do anything about it. That's its own kind of nightmare, right? The first place that I moved after his passing, I moved to a somewhat remote town in northern Massachusetts by the sea. It was a hermitage for me, really. I needed to just sort of gauge. I was having an existential crisis. Who am I now if not a parent? My grandmother used to say, you're an artist if you're making art, right? Am I a parent if I'm not parenting? That was a big question for me. And over the first few months of living in this place, I met my immediate neighbors. And the woman, the family to the left of me, lost 2 children. I can't even conceive. One is bad enough. You know, I just learned that Johann Sebastian Bach survived 13 of his 20 children. Can you imagine? Right? Wow, that's a mind blow, especially when you listen to his music now and having that bit of information, how that informed his art, and for us still does resonate. I'm listening to Bach all the time now because I'm finding a different lens to listen through it through. The family across the street had a child pass from SIDS. No explanation. Healthy baby one day, gone the next. The lady on the other side backed over her toddler in the driveway, and the child didn't survive. So I can't look at my situation and say it's the worst thing that could happen to a person. It was the worst thing that happened to me. And their experiences were the worst thing that ever happened to them, and yours as well. You know, I mean, that's the measuring stick, isn't it?
And that's something we all compare our losses.
There's no comparison.
No, there's not. I mean, same thing. I with the compassionate friends groups,
Right.
You get a wide range of people in there telling their story, that have lost multiple kids, or the method of their loss is never going to be exactly figured out. Who did it? What did it? So they've got that running through their head from now until their end of days.
Yeah.
They'll have no
answers.
No answers. And then on the flip of that, sometimes when you get an answer, that isn't always as helpful as much as people want when they get that answer, or that, not the answer, but the supposed justice. If, when there's a conviction or something, it doesn't necessarily bring the peace that they think. But each loss is unique. Don't compare them. So imagine a pair of twins, they lose their mother. Each one has a different relationship with their parent. The loss is different. How I react to the loss of my daughter is totally different to how her mom reacted, her brother. The Caitlin is the same. The same person, but each of our relationships is different to her. So we all, take it differently. And then to rack our heads when you go and meet other people and compare that loss, it just, but on the same token, I have a certain sense of peace because I know exactly how she died. I can't blame it on anybody other than a gene switch flipped,
Yeah.
and she developed cancer. Right. All those other people have kids that have other causes that they'll never know that. So I get a little piece out of that. But yeah, the comparing sometimes is crazy.
Cameron and I had very, very deep philosophical conversations before he left. And one of those conversations, he said, Papa, we're all going to go. We're all going to go. And nobody knows when and nobody knows how, but we're all going to go. Whether it's by a disease, by an accident, by their own hand, there's nothing that can be done about it. And so what do we do with that information? We're here left behind. to figure that out. And I hope that these conversations will be helpful to everybody on that journey. We're all lost travelers here. Jeff, you wanted to say something.
I want to reassure the person who's clicking for the first time into this podcast that the notion that losing a child is not an unusual circumstance is dead wrong, because statistics matter. We do not see children dying all over the place when there is not a strange pandemic running around. We don't do that. That almost never happens. Children do not predecease their parents in large numbers in societies where such things as vaccinations are routine. They don't. They live longer than their parents in almost all circumstances where wars are not being fought. We need to talk really straight here, non-emotionally, about the hard fact of the unusual nature of being picked up by your neck and smashed into the wall because suddenly the universe, for whatever set of reasons, took your kid. That was not on your list of expectations about life. It simply wasn't. And for people who have to endure a child with illness, which ultimately results in the loss of the child, I can't begin to imagine what that's like. I had a little more than 2 decades with an alcoholic son who finally literally chased the shot glass off a 19-story balcony. But I had some terrific times with that kid. And he was considered a person of great promise. He sold his first wire service news photograph when he was 14. It's a pretty big deal in the photography world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a portrait of Richard Nixon. But the thing is that I want to make sure to that first-time person coming to this website, I want them to feel acknowledged that you have been taken and dropped into a dark hole, and you're now climbing yourself out. And we're here to lend a hand, God damn it. We are here to lend a hand. And each of us has been through a different kind of hell. For some, it's long-term grinding until it finally closes the door, and then we have to deal with the grief. For some people, like there's a member of the group whose 20-year-old kid was standing at a traffic light, and a drunk swerved around the corner and killed him. Killed that child. It wasn't the agony of hospitalization. There wasn't decades of drug abuse. There was instantaneous murder. But each one of us has had to find our own way to learn to breathe again. And the great thing about, Henry, what you've done by creating this podcast is you've created access to people who have their own personal knowledge of what all this is like, and to let them know that they are never alone. And although we may not have answers, we are present. We are present here for them, for each other, with no motivation other than doing the next right thing. That's it.
Beautifully said. You know, the thing that was a pivot for me, it was the turning point in my journey from being completely shattered, my heart being completely shattered, my identity being completely blown to bits. It was through professional help being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. What that did for me was it gave me tools that are not accessible to people without a professional diagnosis, that allowed me to move forward. It allowed me to be able to take the time that I needed in my work, in my relationships, to process and to have tools in place to move forward, including my service dog, who mitigates my PTSD triggers. He's brilliant at it, actually. And because that's been my experience, I put a link on our homepage that anybody can click. And it is a a self-evaluation. It's not a diagnostic tool because only a professional can do that. But you can self-identify and fill out this questionnaire. And by the end of it, you know whether or not you probably are walking around with PTSD that's undiagnosed. And it'll point you in direction of getting help. And
It's really important to know,
Every-
Henry, that
Yeah.
PTSD is not only one kind of experience.
That's
For
right.
some, PTSD is like, for others, it's a broad range. It's a spectrum.
That's right.
I would argue, based on my limited experience of encountering other dads who have lost kids, is that we all experience a kind of PTSD. It can be minimal, it can be maximal.
That's right.
It can be crippling, or it can be numbing. But it's there. And by acknowledging its presence, we get to fully exhale and move into the next day.
Yeah. And this tool actually gives you a very clear sense of what level of PTSD you may be experiencing, if it's more subtle or if it's extreme, right? There are a lot of us who have seen it manifest in ways that are destructive to ourselves, to others. I would call that extreme. And without knowing, because we're not taught how to grieve, we're not taught how to go through this. And because, as you say, it's not a normal thing to outlive your child. It's not.
Wired to do it. We're not wired to do it, which is why it seems like you just plug yourself instead into a 110 into 220, and you're wondering why the toaster's on fire.
Good analogy.
So, tools is the key to it. So imagine we're given the assignment of paint this room, but we're given a hammer, a screwdriver. You can't do it. You're given the wrong tools by society. And there's various ways to learn the tools, steps, actions to get out. But there's nowhere in society that is really teaching the tools, handing out the tools about grief. That is the biggest thing. There's nobody doing anything.
And it doesn't have to just be the grief over a child or a parent or a partner. It could be the grief over losing a career. It could be the grief over having a house caught in a tornado and being blown away.
There's 40 different types of grief out there.
At least.
Yeah.
At least. Right. And so we all can benefit from ramping up the tools in our kit, and we can't do it alone. We cannot do it alone. We need to reach out, and not everybody feels comfortable reaching out to a professional because it reflects on them because of the stigma attached to mental illness. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that here.
I want to argue with that, Henry. People can do it alone. They do it alone, and it's unnecessarily grindingly expensive emotionally. It's destructive to do it alone. It is not an emblem of one's courage to do it alone. It's because you don't know that you don't have to.
Right.
And we come from a broad-ranging Western culture, which tells us as men that, suck it up, buttercup.
Right. Well, that's why the membership, if you go to Facebook, look at the groups for grief, 98% women.
Yeah.
The men are not joining the groups, even the ones that are specifically men's group. The most I've seen, I think, is a group of 3,000 men. That's nothing. And they're not terribly active groups.
Right.
My journey of finding help for my grief. So I was in a very dark space 2 months after, and I was processing the thoughts of how to commit to suicide, which is that key point where you need to seek help. Lots of people, maybe I should end it. But when you get to that point where you specifically start plotting it, that's the motion where you're in deep, you need the help.
Ideation.
So, yeah, I I found, used my insurance, called the number. Well, we can't get you in for 6 weeks. No, you don't understand. I need something today. I'm ready to jump
True.
off the building.
It's true.
Okay, hang on. Give me 20 minutes. And then they got me into somebody. The therapist walked me off the ledge that day, but she said, I'll be honest with you. I can empathize with what you've been through, but I can't really wrap my head around it because I haven't experienced that. So my advice is either try to find a therapist who has gone through your same kind of loss or join one of the parents groups. So I tried to find somewhere else to go. I started Googling grief support, and there was nothing showing up in my town. It's a town of like 30,000 people, and I'm just baffled. So I called the hospital. The hospital says, well, I don't think we have anything. Let me transfer you. They transfer me to somebody in a marketing department 3 cities over. The same hospital corporation here has 40, 50 hospitals spread across the state. So that marketing person says, well, I'm not sure why they sent you to me, but let me call you back. I Googled again, and there's a hospice place nearby. And then ring, ring, she calls, hey, there's a hospice place nearby. Oh, okay. That confirms it. So I call hospice. They said, well, we have a group that meets here at our facility on Tuesdays, and then one on Thursdays at the hospital. Wait, you meet at the hospital? Well, yeah. Well, they don't know you actually do this. Well, it's on all the elevators. We have a piece of paper up there that talks about it. So the communication sucked. So I went to their meeting on a Tuesday morning, and in comes 10 or so individuals or 65, 70 plus. It ended up being more of a group for those of have lost a spouse and are trying to cope. And I was ready to bail. And the girl who was facilitating was somebody I knew because we lived in the same apartment building. And she said, sit it out. And in the packet she gave me was a lead to the Compassionate Friends, which is specifically for parents who have lost a child. There's no therapist, there's nobody else. It's just other parents who meet. So I started going to that. And if you're somebody who's new to this journey right now, that's a great step. It may not be the ultimate, it's not an ultimate for most people healing, getting you out of the muck, but going to share your story, finding other parents who've gone through it who have the same bit of insanity, it's very helpful. And then you have to figure out where to go from there. The lady who ran it, it's 30 years now, I think, since her son died of SIDS. And she says, people ask her, well, why are you still, shouldn't you be over your grief? Why are you still doing this? Well, she says, I'm here for those who are new. Because if I didn't do this, there would be nobody to help those at the new part of the stage, to just in the bereavement, the mourning early on, and they're shattered. They don't have any clue how to cope. I'm here for them. That's why I stay in it. So that journey and trying to find the tools, the right person is immensely complicated.
It is. And there's nothing to say that you have to stay with that one therapist or that one bereavement group. If you don't feel good, if it doesn't seem to be the right one for you, there is going to be another one. Keep looking. Keep searching for the right one because it's out there. One of the reasons that I recently got a diploma in grief and survival counseling is so that I could be a guide on that journey to help point people in the direction of finding the right situation for them, because it's going to be different. Just like birth, it's different.
Before today, it's this: if you are new to this and you clicked on this powerful podcast that Henry's created, 3 things. Number 1, no matter how fucking awful you feel right now, tomorrow actually promises a better day. That was my experience. I thought I should just dump myself out of this life. And then the next day I said, why in the world would I have thought that? Look, there are possibilities here to be of service to other human beings and to continue with my own work. And that gave me a handhold. So just know there are handholds everywhere. You may not see it right now, but there are handholds everywhere. You count. You have value in this life. Part of that means you stay in this life and you reach out and you get support, and then you turn around and help the next guy who just got knocked down. That's what we do. That's the real world. We get knocked down, we climb up, we get our head above the water, and we reach out to the next person who may be drowning next to us. And you know what? We all get to the beach. We get to the beach and we have a barbecue. A vegetarian one if you need one, but we have a barbecue. So stick around. We'll have cooking exercises the next.
We're not promoting vegetarianism, by the way.
Stay with us.
Whatever works for you. You know, thank you. That's absolutely right. And if you don't know where to turn, if you have lost your sense of purpose, that's what we're here for. That's why this club was formed, was to find our sense of purpose again, to find it together amongst brothers and sisters. We're actually getting ready to launch a mothership circle. We have our fellowship of fathers circle. We're going to launch a mothership. The mothership. Got to launch the mothership, right? Because I do believe that, not in a binary way, but I do believe that there are different qualities of processing grief. And there will be projects that we develop together, all of us together as a large group, but also we want to recognize that the grief journey of women, the grief journey of men can be very different. They aren't always, but they can be. And so it's important to acknowledge that and to provide a way for us to come together and seek, right? We're all lost travelers, but the irony in that is that none of us are lost travelers, because we will, as Jeff said beautifully, we'll get there. We'll get to the beach one way or another. Well, I think that's a good point to end on for this first episode. I want to thank you, Bill. I want to thank you, Jeff, for your time and for your heart and for being here to give your testimonial about your journey, to offer resources for others as well. We're going to continue doing that. If you are meeting us for the first time here on our first episode, go become a member on the Lost Travelers Club website. That's losttravelers.club. Become a member, join our Fellowship of Fathers group, get in on this conversation, and let's find our purpose again. Let's find it together. All right. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.